Welcome back to the Fuse Show, everybody. My name is Jim. I'm the co-founder of xfusion.io and also the co-host of the Fuse Show. I'm excited to be joined today by my guest, Montana Butsch. Montana is the founder of Spotivity, a double-sided marketplace that supports after-school programs to increase enrollment and participation rates and enables kids and their parents to make the best decisions about using the time outside of school hours. Welcome to the show, Montana.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go right into this. You are I think you're my second guest out of 100 to have a TED Talk. That is a very cool experience. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience doing that, kind of the prep work and how that went for you.
Yeah, no, it was cool. It was hosted by my business school, which is based currently out of Madrid and Providence. It's a joint degree program with IE and Brown University. And this was an annual TED Talk or an educational TEDx talk that my business school in Spain organized, and they asked me to participate, and it provided a really good opportunity for me to present the dissertation I wrote for the MBA as the talking subject.
That's awesome. Were you nervous?
I've spoken in front of a bunch of people before. It's a little bit different when you have a spotlight and a big red dot to walk along, and the audience is kind of blacked out, and you have the weird kind of earpiece megaphone, the thing that kind of goes around your ear. There's a point in the talk, maybe 2/3 of the way through, where it was working its way out of my ear, and kind of push it back in the hopes that it didn't fall to the floor, because we didn't have an opportunity to really kind of restart the conversation. But outside of worrying about any kind of technical hiccups or maybe misremembering the order of the talk, it was pretty straightforward. It was a lot of fun.
Well, you didn't come across as nervous at all, so that's awesome. What did you memorize the whole thing, or did you just kind of have points that you followed?
Well, I mean, yeah, I can recite my dissertation backwards and forwards. I've kind of lived it for the better part of 15 years up to that point. And creating a presentation, not a traditional PowerPoint presentation, but a presentation nonetheless, kind of give you the guideposts for any kind of given talk. So whenever you get a little bit anxious or you kind of misremember the order of your talk, all you have to do is look over your shoulder and see the image and kind of realize where you are, and then you kind of right set. But yeah, I mean, it's stuff I've spoken about a bunch. It's why I do Spotivity. It's why what I did before with Chicago Training Center. But with a kind of business school vernacular in approach, which is clearly different from most. But again, I could do it without any of the visual aids, but they definitely help.
Yeah, let's jump into Spotivity. Tell us more about what it is and the audience that you serve.
Yeah, so Spotivity is just it's kind of like a pocket genie. I mean, in short, we want more kids and more activities more of the time. The problem is that a lot of decisions are, the result of luck, which is unfortunate. And I guess fortunate for those where luck works in their favor, but that's not like a winning, trajectory to make decisions. And unfortunately, nobody knows what they don't know, but there's huge blind spots in that. Oftentimes people make uninformed decisions or follow a path that's not best for them. It's kind of right for other people, but they get scooped up in it because they don't know if there's any alternatives. And I came to Spotivity with my own little backstory of having found a random sport in high school. We were the only rowing team in the state at the time. It was a school club that my high school had, and who knew that because of that I'd get recruited to Ivy League schools and ultimately try out for the Olympics. And I just wanted to be a basketball player like Michael Jordan. And so that for me was kind of an unknown thing, that as a 15-year-old you get started in something and you realize all these other doors are open. And that led to Chicago Training Center. But to be honest with you, not everyone needs to be a rower. It's a lonely enterprise, and it's very hard. And most people don't want to be athletic anyway. Sports aren't for them. And so Spotivity is born out of that big kind of unmet need for rich and poor kids alike, where they don't know what they don't know. They don't want to be bored. They want agency, and so this just provides an avenue to get that agency and to make more informed decisions. So it kind of takes the micro view that was Chicago Training Center for a very focused goal with a very focused population, and then just blows the doors off of it and say, well, all teens need access, all teens need activity. We just don't know which one, and we're not going to make a value statement on any of it. but we want to make all those options apparent to the kids.
Yeah. I told you when we spoke offline that I've got 5 kids total. 2 of them are grown, but I have 2 14-year-old girls that would be we could very much need something like this. And we try our best to keep them appropriately busy. And we find that is best for them and exposes them to multiple different areas. I'm curious this is a little bit off topic, but I'm curious what you would say about the idea of sort of the pressure that a lot of kids have in figuring out what they want to do or be as adults versus experimenting with a variety of different avenues.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I mean, I have 9-year-old twins, and my son, for a 9-year-old, is a pretty accomplished baseball player, but that means nothing, right? But he's coordinated, he likes it. And then the question becomes, how much does he double down and focus in baseball and cut out other opportunities? Maybe he could be a world-class painter or really enjoy acting, but he doesn't have any time for it because he's spending all his time on the baseball mound doing, baseball-focused things. I think, no one teenager ought to do only one thing all of the time. I don't know what that thing is. Actors ought to be involved in some amount of physical activity, and painters need to be involved in other. I mean, you need experiences all around. And what we aren't is a prescriptive tool that says you as a teen with this background ought to do these things. I think that's really problematic. Yeah. But I also think that teens and parents alike need to be thoughtfully informed about what might track with them, what might carry their interest, knowing some of their proclivities, knowing some of their aptitudes, knowing those things. Like the Summer Olympics are really great, right? If a bunch of teenagers that want to be athletic but only view kind of the big 4 professional sports as the only things they could ever do athletically, then they watch the Olympics and they realize, oh man, like there's this whole scope of stuff I could be doing, and never been given the opportunity to do those things. Where can I do those things? That's an awesome question for a kid to ask. But then the functional problem exists. How do you connect those dots, right? How do you move from your potential interest, however you gain it, to actually implementing it into something that you could do? And for us, that was one big part of the value that we bring, is the ability to kind of drill down on some of those things if the kids know. And then if the kids don't know, we do ask a series of questions that get at insights for us that's based in the research that we do with Utah State to say, okay, well, you as a person track in these functional ways that lend themselves to these types of activities. Have you thought of checking them out? And we would like to think that for the most part, a lot of those activities are completely new, opportunities for teens. They would have to actually Google the term and see what it is those things are. But then you're informing them about the unknowns. And that is probably much larger in scope than the knowns. And all of a sudden they realize, oh man, there's like this whole petri dish of stuff I could be doing. And there's a way to kind of solve for it. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I'm not a believer at all in specialization. I'm not at all a believer in prescriptive activities for teens. At a certain point, you do need to drill down, and people do have expertise in certain areas, and you need to hone those skills. But teens are functionally young. I mean, even when they get into college, they're really young. And so having a lot of opportunity to try different things, you'll learn more about yourself. You'll learn, things about others. It's just all good value add. The trick is kind of how do you do that? And that's where hopefully we come in.
Yeah. My cousin is a hockey player, is Blake Coleman, and he's had a pretty successful career in playing Major League Hockey, but he grew up living and breathing hockey. That was his entire life from the time that he was probably 3 years old. And I think it's like, and I think I'm so proud of how well he's done, but like that's the extreme minority. And I know there's a lot of kids that go down a similar path hoping to make it to the pros, and that's just not a realistic possibility. And it ends in disappointment. So I love the idea of having a much wider range of different activities and interests that the kids can explore.
The opposite story to what you just gave is the functional reason why I started Chicago Training Center, and it is kind of core to Spotivity, and that's the movie Hoop Dreams. So I might be aging myself a little bit, but I'm 42. So growing up in the 90s, the movie Hoop Dreams was a big deal. And it's at the height of Michael Jordan's popularity. You had these 2 inner city kids from Chicago who were very accomplished high school teen athletes, but on the national and global scale couldn't cut it, but they're still in rarefied air of being able to play that sport very well, but clearly it didn't lend themselves to any significant professional contract and the life of luxury that they were all aiming for. And they made that decision to pursue basketball without any other kind of functional plan B. And that's a problem. And that is endemic of just a lot. To pick a name and pick a sport, you see it all the time. It's not a strange phenomenon. What is it? Only 2% of high school athletes go and play college sport, let alone go and become a professional at it. So
Yeah.
Kids and teens aren't attuned to those ridiculous odds. Not many of them are realistic, and that's also a function of their age, right? You're not supposed to be realistic when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, but at the same time, you want to be armed with meaningful information so you can make more informed decisions, and unfortunately, many of them just aren't.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tell me about the artwork behind you.
Yeah, well, I don't know when it was done, but this is all, probably 6 and 7-year-old artwork, Bella and Theo. So it's better than a fake bookshelf of books I don't read.
I love it. Yeah, it tells a lot about your passion. Speaking of that, I know that you have an athletic background. I want to know more about how you kind of developed your big why. Like, you're obviously very passionate about this. Why? Like, what's the root of that?
Well, I think it's because I can, partly. I'm not religious, but I went to a Jesuit high school. Volunteering was always a big thing. I volunteered kind of all through high school. I'm a kind of a big social justice guy. I care about those things. That's why I did a nonprofit when I came back from Oxford, because I wanted to play it forward. I kind of care what's on my tombstone when I die. And so, I've been behind the curtain. I mean, through rowing, I'm an inner city kid, went to a suburban high school, went to an Ivy League school, then rowed at Oxford, tried out for the American and the British national team, realized I wasn't good enough. But as a function of all of that, I got to mix and belong and participate in parts of society that, people don't even understand if I spend a lot of time trying to describe it, right? And so functionally, I've been behind multiple types of curtains, and yet I can come back to Chicago and do Chicago Training Center and recruit kids on the far west and south side for the sport that they've never heard of, because I have the ability to translate it. And so because I can do all those things, the important market, the teenagers understand that I'm here for them, and they understand that I'm here trying to help them make their lives better in whatever way I can. And for me, it's trying, how can you access? And here, I'm a guy that I haven't lived on welfare, but we were middle income at best, living in the city in Chicago. So I know what that's like. I can't claim, to be on the poverty line, but, I went to suburban schools and I saw what real wealth was, and that wasn't my background. But yet, in spite of all of that, I was a better rower than many of the rich kids, right? And that was great. And so ultimately, I realized, I think early on, that I was kind of a chameleon. And, in high school, I could run with a graffiti crew and get chased by cops, and talk myself out of having the police call my parents. Meanwhile, be involved in AP social justice and care about that. And it's just kind of who I am as a person. And so part of the why is because I can, and I feel that I ought to because I can. And I don't feel like what I do is a job. It's possibly more of a calling than a job, but I do need to pay the bills. But I really like what I do. And then on the flip side of that, which is a little bit funny, is I went to an Ivy League school for my business school, right? I.E. Brown. And so, I'm a guy with all these ludicrous degrees. And yet, coming out of that, I was interviewed by high-ranking top-tier employers coming out of business school, but no one was willing to hire me because they didn't see how they could translate my skills and my abilities, referenced against my age at that time. I was mid-30s when I came out of it, into a role that would have been traditionally corporate. And so part of the why is because I'm reasonably well suited to be a startup founder, given the fact that I can manage uncertainty and I can manage big risk taking, but thoughtful risk taking. And people kind of inevitably put me in leadership roles all the time. And that is somewhat risky for a corporate hire. So I couldn't go the traditional corporate route. but I was able to leverage that background into getting funding to doing this, this work, which, when it works with the scale that we have and where we can go globally, it becomes a really, really, functionally big deal. This isn't small potatoes at all. We're not a kind of a provincial ed tech startup that maybe only works regionally or nationally. We're a global marketplace platform with all teens and all young people globally around the world that could impact from this, and we built it accordingly. And that's a really, really big deal. And so the why is because it's partly who I am and partly because I was left with no other options, but it does leverage my background well.
Yeah. I'm curious, this wasn't on my, on my mind to ask you until you kind of brought it up, but what would you say about your twins taking a similar educational path to what you take? Are you still a big believer in higher education as a wise path?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think higher education satisfies a couple of different things, and they're not mutually exclusive. So, in the knowledge economy here and now, and with trying to get hired, you clearly need skills, and those skills theoretically, can be learned outside of the classroom. But obtaining those skills is also functionally different from the type of education you receive and socialization and thoughtful recourse with a group of your peers, being challenged by professors, learning how to think, learning how to write. Those things are very different and aren't really functional trade skills that you can easily transfer, that I think higher education is kind of well positioned to provide. But I guess it really depends what's best for the kid. I mean, at the end of the day, you could be a real high-end plumber and get paid, multiple six figures per year and not have to go to college. And if you really like the challenges of plumbing and it's an analytical skill and you like talking to people and you want to do those things, I'm not here to begrudge you at all. I would question, why are you going to a 4-year university if that's something that's better aligned for you? You might be wasting your time at university. I think that a lot of young people aren't armed or aren't mature enough to kind of ask those questions of themselves. So they then look at college as a way where, screw it, I'm just going to spend 4 years and figure this stuff out. And that's a little bit of a risk, right? Especially with the educational debt that can come on top of you. If you realize after 4 years, you would rather have been a plumber and then you're set. So I'm a big advocate also of gap years. And that's something I learned when I went to England. A lot of my peers that I came to know in England, went through a gap year. And it was something that my parents had talked to me about, but I never took seriously because I wanted to be an athletic recruit, and I was. But a lot of the people I rode with at Oxford, which is a big deal, also took gap years, and that didn't impact their rowing at Oxford. So that was dispelled in real time for me. And I realized, oh man, I wish I paid attention when I was 18, because that would have been a real smart idea. But at 18, you're not liable to listen to much anyway. But high school is there. The educational system, by and large, I think is problematic because it's built on a system that has been outdated for generations and it hasn't functionally changed. And maybe with COVID and remote work and how the knowledge economy is transforming and everything globalism means everything is kind of flat, maybe a thoughtful revision of what education is supposed to accomplish will happen. I mean, I'm not terribly optimistic, but it did happen once, but it was on the back end of, the Second World War and America in question leader in the world. Those things aren't the reality here and now. But I think smart parents and smart educators are realizing that the landscape has shifted so much that they at least have to arm their kids to make better and much more informed decisions. And then the last thing I'll throw out there that, again, you don't think about it this way, but you ought to, is that, school and further education is really a good way to gain networks. And they don't want to talk about it, right? But at the end of the day, let's not ourselves. You go to an Ivy League school versus a state school versus a community college versus some third tier, local college. There's a functional difference between who you know and the opportunities that that come out of all of that, right? If you want to go into a top tier consulting firm, you can only go to the schools where those top tiers recruit from, because they're not going to bother to look for you anywhere else. And so, that's also very real and also very American. So there's a lot of nuance there. And unfortunately, most people just don't know it, right? And they're operating on an old system, but the current way of hiring and being, has made that old system kind of redundant, but not enough changes have kind of come in its place.
Yeah. I'm curious, as a father and as a mentor to a lot of kids, do you have an end result that you're hoping for them that's specific, or do you feel personally open to them pursuing a path that may not include higher education, maybe the plumber scenario or whatever? It's like, do you feel open to that in general?
100%. At the end of the day, I would like all teams, and I think it's a possibility if they're presented with this, early and in a language that they can fully understand and appreciate. I think all people, want a purpose, right? They want something that gives their life purpose, because the sooner they feel that they have purpose, the less the work becomes drudgery.
Yep.
And something that needs to be accomplished just so you can have some money, to something that you enjoy doing. Subsequently, you'll be better at doing it. The deliverables will be better. And I would like to think that you could find something that gives you enough of the cash in hand to make your time worth it. And then you're not looking for new jobs every couple of years. You're not looking for things you can belong in, or you're not using a job just as an excuse to do your passion on a part-time basis around the work hours, right? So whatever that is, I would like all teams to find it. And that's a problem for rich and poor kids alike, right? I've known plenty of rich kids that have all the advantages in the world, but they just suffer from a lack of imagination, and they suffer from, a sense of belonging, because they just don't know what to do. And poor people, I think, will suffer from a lack of understanding of what the options are that are out there, because they're presented more often than not with kind of service equivalent type jobs and other kind of subservient jobs, as opposed to, what kid from the west side of Chicago fully understands what a private equity job is. And that's going to be functionally beyond them, which is unfortunate, right? And so, they all functionally have the same type of problem. And so long as they can kind of marry their time with some type of passion, then there's no question what they're doing is worth their time. And, that's going to speak volumes to how they spend their time moving forward. But that said, I think that position in today's economy isn't, fully embraced, or at least provided as a informative team so they can then benefit from that. But then again, that's part of the reason why we exist.
Yeah. I want to touch on an area that you talked about in your TED Talk. You said that standing out is a really good thing and allows you to differentiate. And I think you were talking in context of teens. And, as I mentioned, I have two 14-year-old daughters. One of them is borderline consumed with being cool, fitting in, being popular. The other doesn't care. And the one of my daughters that really cares, that we're having this conversation, they just started school. And I said, are you going to take a lunch to school? And she goes, I don't know. Like, are you going to take a lunch or get a hot lunch there? And she goes, I don't know, Dad. It just really depends on what everybody else is doing. I don't want to take a hot lunch or get a hot lunch if they're all bringing their lunch and vice versa. So I kind of need to wait and see. I'm like, well, sweetie, like, if everybody says, like, somebody has to make a stand, and like, that's how cool is defined, right? Is somebody steps up and like, oh, this is what I do. I get a hot lunch or whatever. So I'm curious what you meant by that, if I'm even barking up the wrong tree or the right tree.
I think it's inappropriate, just by sheer nature of the definition, to think that all teams are going to be intrepid and be able to forge their own path irrespective of peer pressure, because then the definition of intrepid doesn't work, right? I mean, intrepid is, a finite number, or a small minority of a population. And part of the talk was about how, for some of the teams that I dealt with at Chicago Training Center, they would have been a success regardless of what activity they found. They happened to find rowing in me, and because of that, they did well. But hell, they could have been on a bowling team. For that community would have been equally almost as weird, right? But they were mentally aligned to look at an opportunity differently, and as such, they thought that rowing in me, was a good team to volunteer for. Now I had to go through the effort to make it seem appealing and be cool enough for them wanting to join, so that they could kind of tether their own personal intrepidness to my enterprise, which was Chicago Training Center.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the responsibility of everyone that runs a program, be it like mine or maybe an after school dance program or a book club. I mean, whatever it is, to figure out a way to tap into a teenager's psyche in the sense that it's going to trigger, an interest from them on a very kind of organic level. And that's kind of tough, which is why you need exposure to a lot of stuff, because a lot of people I spoke to, I spoke to thousands of kids and I only had at most 50 kids on the team at one time, right? So most people say no. So it's like a big old Venn diagram. I could sort out some of the kids that might like rowing, but that's only going to be a minority, but there's a million other activities. And so those other activities need to think about their own interesting ways that they can present themselves, so that for those that could care less about rowing, it might trigger for them and something else. And, and for your daughter that's looking to see what the group wants to do, some of it becomes like, how is she someone that's naturally positioned to be, a follower or a leader? If you're a leader, you care less about what people think. And I think we could say, and that's not a value statement, right? But some people are naturally aligned to not care about what people think, and other people very much do and want to be a follower. But some people are extremely good followers and support the cause and work really, really well. And you can't have a world of nothing but leaders, because then we get done. So she needs to go through, and all kids need to go through a certain amount of kind of self-awareness. And then I say our job as parents is to kind of foster kind of an explorative gene for all of the kids to be willing to try things openly and honestly, so that they can find something that functionally rings their bell, right? And you kind of don't know what it is. And it's convenient. Like, it'd be really convenient for me if my kids love rowing when they're old enough to try it, because then I can easily tell them, how rowing can work. But they might functionally hate it and never want to do it. And I have to be okay with that, which clearly will be hard because I love the sport. But I don't want them to do something that makes me feel better, because I don't want to live vicariously through my kids. I want them to have the best functional life they can. So, it is kind of tough. And the teen years are really tough because, peer pressure is a bitch. And how do you deal with that is really tough. And for me, I'm clearly an independent person, and I wasn't that swayed by public persona around me, but that doesn't mean I wasn't affected by it. But I also went to a Jesuit high school that required certain amounts of service. And so it's kind of like that old adage where you hate it if your parents go to some school dance as a chaperone, but secretly you kind of like it. You don't want to talk to them at all. But then if your father forces you to dance with someone that you want to dance with, then you have an excuse if things go badly, because your father forced you to do that dance. Secretly, you're very happy because they broke the ice for you. You'll never admit it. And so there's that little dance that goes on all the time as well, that as parents, it's kind of our job to kind of shepherd them through, while at the same time letting them own all the positive outcomes and let them shit on us if some negative ones appear, because we are the parent. And in time, it just kind of works itself out. But peer pressure is definitely tough.
Yeah, for sure. I want to switch gears a little bit to going into kind of the founder/business side of things. I was doing some research pre-call, and I don't remember if I read this or listened to it on a past conversation that you did, but you're talking about playing the long game in business, and you're relating that to sort of your industry specifically. But this has been something that's been on my mind a lot, just generally. And it seems to me, and Naval Ravikant talks a lot about this, but it seems to me that the founder, the companies that play the long game tend to win, because it seems like very few people optimize for the long term. So I'm curious what you would say to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope that's correct, right? At the end of the day,
that's what we're betting on.
I'm in a lot of trouble. But that was always the play with what I presented to my investors. And that was always the play for me here and now. It was the play when I interviewed and got the tech team to come on board to build what it was I was building. So I'm not a technical founder. I don't know how to code. I know what this tool needs to be and how it needs to work. It's my job to convince the right people that this is the thing and that I've done my homework. Luckily, I think I have the background and the pedigree to do that homework well, and for them to believe me. But some good ideas just don't work. But you can cover for bad ideas, right? So my job is to first ensure that I'm a startup that deserves to win. And I think most startups deserve to fail. So a high portion of those 90% that fail, I think they likely deserve to fail. They have a shitty idea, shitty execution, don't read the market, whatever. So I think my first job is to ensure I'm not part of that group. And then, once I'm not part of that group, it's kind of how do I cover for the downside on shit that I can account for. Now I can't account for COVID. Some things you just have to be able to be, flexible on.
Yeah.
And, taking the long game into account, I mean, I guess I could blow up overnight like TikTok and have hundreds of millions of users, but no one's going to come up with a business plan that believes that bullshit, right? And no investor is going to give money on the thought that, yeah, that's going to happen. Now, maybe, of course, you have a lot of backers, but at the end of the day, we saw what happened with Quibi, right? And they had a huge group of backers. They raised billions of dollars. And how long did they exist? Maybe 9 weeks? It was a big laughing stock. It didn't work. So I think with the long game, with reasonable goals and metrics and kind of creating reasonable moats to, outside pressures and competitions and being willing to functionally eat shit for a while you spend time to convince the right people and form the right relationships, I would like to think is a really good pathway to success. And I think part of that is probably for me a little bit natural because my background as a rower. I mean, as an example, for Oxford, you train all year for one race. You have a bunch of little races in between, right? But they don't really count. Your success is based on one race only, sort of binary. Teammates that are in losing boat race crews rarely talk to each other after the fact, yet they've had 9 months of shared misery and shared joy, but the race result didn't work for them, so that they don't stay connected, and those that won are connected for your life, right? So for me, I've been drilled in as a rower, but also going through processes of realizing, all right, well, every practice is important. Every day is important. You can't take a day off because your counterparts aren't taking days off.
Yeah.
And it's a very long slog, and preparing for a race in April when it's the middle of November, you can convince yourself that day is not important, and that's a complete functional lie. And so baking that into how I'm doing stuff now, I don't know how things that I'm doing now will ultimately positively impact me in the future, but I know that they will in some way or another. And so you just keep layering all of that stuff up, and over time, shit matters. And it's only with the benefit of hindsight can you realize, look at over all this work, that all of this mattered, but it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's where my background really, really helps.
That's useful. I want to land with this, Montana. I'm curious what advice you would give yourself as a founder 10 years ago, maybe even 20, however long you want to go back. And I'm curious to hear that from your personal perspective, but also I'm considering how it might relate to other founders that are on the younger side, maybe their early 20s, and they just, like you said earlier, they don't know what they don't know.
So, for me, when I was in college, rowing at Penn, I always knew that I wanted to help out inner city kids, right? And so I knew that when I was done maximizing my talent, that I wanted to give back. And so I had the benefit in my late teen years to realize that I had some type of kind of career bucket list. And I think that that's a little bit abnormal. So I had this thing where I cared about what was on my headstone, and I had a career bucket list. And one of them was helping inner city kids row. So when all of my friends were getting jobs at Goldman Sachs, that was nothing I was ever interested in. And I came back from Oxford and started Chicago Training Center. And, I think I don't think I would have changed my decisions had I known how hard that was going to be. But at the same time, I was in my mid-20s when I started it. And I didn't realize how tough it was going to be. But I knew I was doing something that I always wanted to do. And I didn't know how that would matter long-term, but I knew it would impact things downstream for me in ways that would have to be positive, because I felt like I was sacrificing quite a lot to do all this stuff. And so I kind of didn't question me pursuing it. All the while I was pissed off that my friends were buying houses and traveling to France and having the benefits of a lavish lifestyle that I clearly, let pass by, at least at that stage in my life. But it was because of Chicago Training Center that ultimately I found the investors to do now this thing, which wouldn't have happened. So the only advice I would give is that if you're lucky enough to ask some very pointed questions about yourself as a person and how you want to be perceived when all this stuff is done and over and you're no longer here, and then you kind of know those two endpoints, then so long as you don't expect and plan for a life of quick successive wins, shortcuts and thinking that it's all going to be easy, realize that it's a really long road and it's kind of harrowing and you got to chop wood for a real long time. Ultimately, kind of the peace of mind and the mental positivity comes through because you're always doing something you really enjoy. I mean, I wasn't earning lavishly at CTC, but I loved seeing the kids. I loved seeing progress, and I saw progress. I loved building, and we built. And then I've used that same focus here at Spotivity. I'd like to be further along, but compared to where we are a year ago, we have an educational partnership with Utah State where we're getting accolades and newspapers and in print, and it's only a matter of time before the ball metaphorically rolls downhill. Yeah. That shit just doesn't happen. It happens after years of effort. Yeah. So for anyone starting out, it's probably much safer to presume it's going to be a very long road and very harrowing, and it's going to take a lot of resolve. And to look at that not as a excuse not to get started, but at least to be realistic with yourself about what that pathway is going to look like, while at the same time opening yourself up to the possibility if someone's going to give you $1 million and you can scale super quickly, then you take it and that's good, but you can't plan on that on being like a strategy tool, right? Because I don't plan my year out thinking, yeah, and in 10 months, I'm going to meet someone that's going to give me $1 million. Like that just doesn't happen. So that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, I guess being somewhat realistic, and then build, another real big thing is outside of knowing yourself, be very clear with the areas that you don't have functional knowledge in, or that you don't back yourself figuring out, and be okay with that, but make it a priority to find people that can fill those gaps and foster those relationships, because it doesn't make you any less of as a founder to not know everything. Shit, there's a ton I don't know, and still today I don't know how to code, and I don't really care, but it's my job to find the people that can fill those gaps and to trust them for what they do well, because they sure as hell can't do my job, but I also can't do theirs. So it's my job as a founder to kind of figure out what the witch's brew is and plug all those gaps. And so, the arrogant founder that feels that they can do everything probably is one guy that's probably going to fail. But finding people that can gap fill is definitely key. And you never know where those opportunities and those people come from. So you really got to put yourself out there. It's kind of, you got to go to a bar or where the girls are at, right? It's kind of simple in many respects, but you have to figure out where you have to place yourself to kind of, fill all those gaps.
Good stuff. Well, Montana, I love what you're doing. I love your passion. I love what you've created. I really appreciate you taking the time today to share this wisdom with us. The website is spotivity.com. That's SPOTIVITY.com. What's the best way for folks to reach out if they're interested?
Yeah, if anyone's interested, if they don't want to misspell my name, they can do info@spotivity.com, or they can spell Montana at spotivity.com. Some of that information is also on the website as well. On social media, we're on all social media as well, so that there's another way to reach us there.
Excellent. Well, we'll have all these links on the landing page, and I really appreciate your time. Hope you have a good afternoon.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the forum.
Cheers.